Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 271 of the Tick Bootcamp podcast. The title of today's interview is The Ultimate Fighter, an interview with UFC legend Jim Miller. My name is Richard Johannesson.
And I'm Matt Sabatello.
Folks, this is a really special episode with a very successful professional athlete. Jim Miller has fought the most bouts in UFC history. He has the most wins in UFC history, and he has the most wins in the UFC lightweight division. And what Jim Miller did to be successful as an athlete is he was very careful to plan before he acted, and he took all of these steps that he used to become a successful athlete to become successful on his Lyme disease journey.
So many of our listeners believe that celebrities can't help them in their Lyme journey. And although Jim Miller is a celebrity, a genetically gifted professional athlete, and has a lot of resources, it doesn't mean that he can't help you. We need to move away from this false belief because everything Jim did are steps that can be repeated by you and will benefit you in your Lyme disease healing journey.
So folks, without further ado, we're really excited to introduce to you The Ultimate Fighter, an interview with UFC legend Jim Miller. Hey, Jim Miller, UFC legend, welcome to the Tick Bootcamp podcast.
Thank you for having me.
We are really excited to have you, Jim, and we want to give our folks a context because for folks like me and Matt, who are huge fans of the UFC and quite frankly, huge fans of yours, even though you didn't know who we were before today, we want to give all of our folks, especially folks in our international community, a context of who Jim Miller is. So Jim, talk to us about the UFC and who you are in the UFC.
I am the record holder for the most fights in the UFC. Got the most wins at lightweight. I'm tied for the most wins altogether in the UFC. I've got the most time spent in the Octagon as a lightweight. I've got quite a few records at this point. A lot of just from attrition. I signed with the UFC in 2008, and I've got 39 fights.
So Jim, I mean, that it is just really, really exciting that, somebody who has had the longevity that you have had, despite dealing with some of the health challenges, to get to sort of the rare air that you're in, right? I mean, you have more fights than anyone else. You have more victories than anyone else. And you have fought some of the great legends in the UFC. And I shared with Matt offline, I'm going to share with you now online. I've been a huge fan and follower of yours for a long time. I always like the East Coast guys. I always like the guys who have a strong wrestling background. You've always been one of those guys. And you have fought, some of, again, the legends in the UFC. So one of my favorite fights, one of the fights I looked forward to for a long, long time was when you fought Cowboy Cerrone. I mean, that was just an awesome fight. We were all like waiting for that fight, at least the folks in my community who follow you, because you're just two of our favorite fighters. And we knew that was going to be an awesome fight. And it really was a great fight. And you and Donald, of course, have a lot in common in that you both have had these long careers. You both had a large number of wins. And I guess the place where you distinguish yourself, and you stayed in one weight class, he had to move to another weight class. So you have a greater number of wins than he does in your weight class. So that was an awesome fight. So talk to us first about what it was like to fight Cowboy.
That was a good one. I had bumped into him a few times leading up to that fight. We'd known each other, and I think that was my 18th fight in the UFC. I knew he was going to throw a lot of shots to the body up the center, and we had trained for it and prepared for it. And of course, when the opportunity was there in front of me to try to land a strike, I committed too hard up the center, and he made me pay on the very first combination in the fight. And from that point, it was just kept getting the wind knocked out of me, and it was a painful one. Some of those fights are like some of them are tough. They push your conditioning and stuff like that. That one was probably the most painful fight altogether that I've ever been in.
Well, I mean, I would think every fight is painful. I mean, you guys feel you beat the tar out of one another in every single fight. So you fought one of my other really favorite fighters. Clay the Carpenter Guida was one of my favorite fighters. My dad was a carpenter. He was just high energy, never stopped. So when you and he were about to fight, it was another one of those fights we were really looking forward to. We knew this was going to be a war. We knew it was going to be a fight. Talk to us about what it was like to fight that legend and how cool that was.
We had the opportunity to fight, could have had the opportunity to fight for years. We were both at the top of the division. And I think it was 2011. They actually, when Frank Yeager and Gray Maynard were going to fight the third time, they ended up having each of them had to have surgery. So they were shuffling some fights around, and they offered Clay to me on like a week notice, and I had been out of the gym and doing a renovation on my kitchen and stuff like that. So I was like, it was the only time that I'd ever turned anything down at that point. And I was like, yeah, I'm not fighting Clay on a week notice. So that was in 2011, and things kind of just kept rolling for a few years there, and his name never just came up, and then it finally did. We met in New Jersey, and it was awesome to really be a fan of somebody and get to fight them. Clay is another guy that I've hung out with at events and stuff like that. Really great guy. And I mean, that was one of those fights where I was just so like excited to go out and fight him. And, unfortunately things went my way pretty quickly in that fight.
Yeah, that was a great fight. It really was a great fight. So I'm going to give you my third favorite fight. Another one that there was just great anticipation for, because he's another legend in the UFC. You fought Nate Diaz, right? And I mean, Nate, of course, is just this really tough guy, a winner of the Ultimate Fighter. I mean, in most cases, when you fight one of the winners of Ultimate Fighter, you whoop their butts. You and Nate had a great fight, right? And Nate, of course, is a legend. I guess he became most well known in his battles with the good Irishman who, who came over, and Conor McGregor really changed the face of the UFC. So talk to us about how cool it was to fight against, that West Coast guy, Nate Diaz.
Nate's one of these guys that's been around for a long time, and we had met. We had actually trained together a little bit out in California. I'd gone out there for one of my training partners' fights, and we had the opportunity to get on the mats together and spar a little bit. That was a pretty cool card, because it was we main evented a Fox card, so to get that opportunity was great. He's one of those guys that's he's super tricky. He's very planted when he throws his strikes. I ended up running into one of those, and it is what it is, but yeah, tons of respect for that guy. It's cool to share the Octagon with, so many great fighters and great dudes.
Yeah, no, it really has been cool to, be really excited about watching you and have great anticipation for you fighting against some of the legends, watching two legends like you and Nate fight, or watching legends like you and some of the other great folks like Cowboy have fought. It has just been really great for us as fans. So let's walk it back a little bit. Let's talk about your background. You're a Jersey boy, and actually another one of my favorite fighters. I don't think you fought him in the UFC, but I think you and Frankie Edgar had fought before you were in the UFC. Another one of my favorite fighters is a Jersey boy. I mean, we have a lot of really good Long Island guys. We'll talk about that later, but talk to us about what it's like to grow up in New Jersey, and how your wrestling career began as a young guy in New Jersey.
So I grew up in a big family. I've got 3 siblings, 2 older brothers and a younger sister, and my mother's side of the family has a pretty good wrestling pedigree. Her one of her older brothers was a 3-time state champ here in New Jersey. He went 98-1 in his high school career. Then he went on to wrestle at Lehigh and was a 2-time 4th and 2-time national champion for Lehigh. Mike Frick. He was ranked number 1 in the world at one point, leading up to the 1980 Olympics that he had qualified for, and then we, boycotted those Olympics. So he didn't get his opportunity to wrestle. But yeah, so Mike was a phenomenal wrestler, and then his brothers wrestled as well, and one of his younger brothers, Jim, also wrestled for Lehigh. Ended up missing out on All-American status once or twice. But one of my earliest memories is watching my Uncle Jim wrestle at Lehigh. I think I was probably only 3. The only reason I remember it is that he broke his ankle in the wrestling match. So, it was kind of one of those things that something happened. So you kind of, you remember that type of stuff. But yeah, so I grew up with wrestling. My older brothers, they were wrestling when they were young. And of course I was on the mats with them. And I think I was like officially on the novice team when I was like 4, wrestling at about like 43 pounds, something like that. So yeah, I mean, the sports and between wrestling and we played football and baseball as kids, and we were constantly outside. It didn't really matter what we were, what the weather was like, what time of year it was. We were always doing stuff outside, and from playing sports and making up games and stuff like that to just roaming around in the woods. And a lot of people don't necessarily know what northwestern New Jersey is like because a lot of people, they fly into like Newark Airport and that's about it, right? And then maybe they go to New York City, but I'm from the hills. Like
Yeah.
it's kind of a little bit backwoods out here. So we grew up, like I said, just getting dirty head to toe, and
So Jim, let's talk about that, right? So you're, the Miller boys and girls were outside all the time. You were born to be an athlete. You had a strong genetic code from your mother's family that sort of sent you in a direction which actually you turned into your career. But you spent a lot of time in the Lyme Belt, right? New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York had, a large number of ticks. We have a large number of Lyme disease cases, and we're always sort of bouncing back and forth between New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania to determine who has the greatest number of Lyme disease cases. Pennsylvania has beaten both of our states out, Jim, the last 2 years. Congratulations, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
So you're an outdoorsy guy from an outdoorsy family. So what do you know about ticks and Lyme disease when you were scrapping out in the woods in Pennsylvania? I'm sorry, in New Jersey.
As a kid, it really, there wasn't much, right? Like I remember, I can count on one hand how many ticks I found on me as a kid, as I was going through high school. It really was only a handful. There was one that we were out playing and I was like rolling around in a leaf pile and I came inside and there was one inside my belly button. So that was a pain in the butt to get out. But there weren't a lot of ticks on me. And of course I heard about it as a kid, but it wasn't that big of a thing, and like, it's crazy. Some of the misconceptions that were going around at that point as well, that unfortunately some still survive to this day, but we didn't really worry about it all that much.
Yeah, I'm always looking for context because again, I'm old enough to be your dad, Jim. So we were concerned about ticks during my childhood. Tick checks were a regular part of our experience. We actually had a tick kit. It was a janky tick kit that had Vaseline and these dirty tweezers and these matches that we would have in our mudroom as we were walking in. So we were very tick aware.
Yeah.
Not only on us, but also on our animals. So I'm just wondering, as somebody who's you're more than 20 years younger than me, how your family dealt with ticks. I mean, were your parents telling you that you should be wearing tick spray? Were they telling you to do tick checks all the time? Were they what were they doing to keep you safe? Because I'm sure in the athletic Miller family, they were keeping an eye on whether or not you were going to break an ankle the way Uncle Jim did on the wrestling match, right? So they were trying to keep you safe and healthy during your athletic career. Were they doing the same things with you when you were having either social time or practice time out, outside?
We would tick check here and there, and it really came down to like taking a good shower, scrubbing good in the shower, and trying to make sure that everything was clean, and anything that needed to be washed off got washed off. And that's really what it like came down to. It wasn't super crazy. We didn't wear like bug spray, tick spray all that much. And yeah, like I said, it wasn't, there weren't that many instances where like we found one on us, to be perfectly honest. Later on, when I was in my teens, when we would be like pheasant hunting with the dogs and stuff like that, there were times where you're driving home and you're picking 20, 30 ticks off the dog, that are just crawling around and throwing them out the window. But yeah, it didn't happen all that often where we found one on us.
Talk about the value you placed on fitness, on nutrition, on the different tools you needed to keep your body healthy.
In this day and age, if I was a kid now in 2020, there's no doubt in my mind that I'd be diagnosed with ADHD. And I think there are a lot of us out there that the same thing would happen. And for me personally, I just always felt better after I pushed myself, after I like blew my lungs out a little bit, after I went hard. I was the kid in gym class that was, running the mile as hard as they could while everyone else walked. I was the kid, just going full bore. So it really wasn't even like necessarily a mindset for me. It was almost like a need to do things that challenged me and to push my body. I started running to get in a better shape and to manipulate my weight when I was probably in about third grade for wrestling. I'd go for a run, the nights before matches to lose that last little quarter pound, half pound that I need to lose. But it was always something that like, hey, if I want to wrestle at my best, I'm going to put in the extra work. But it was like a little bit of it was mindset. A lot of it was just, I needed to do it. I needed to go. I needed to move, really, is what it was. I mean, diet wise as a kid, I had a horrible diet. Maybe that's why I'm only 5'8". My brothers are way taller than me. Maybe it stunted my growth, but yeah, I didn't mature in my diet until I was into my like early 20s.
Did you always envision yourself as a professional athlete? And if you didn't, what was your sort of dream for your future when you were the active ADD kid, in New Jersey?
There was part of me that always kind of wanted to fight. I grew up watching all the cheesy 80 movies, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Bloodsport and this and that, and Kickboxer. And so it definitely like etched into my mind a little bit. Like I kind of want to do something like that. But yeah, I didn't know. I didn't know that that the sport was going to get to that point where I could make a career out of it. I didn't know any of that. I didn't really I didn't have that idea that I could be a professional athlete, because it's like, as a wrestler, you're not going to, make it that far, right? You can wrestle through college and that's it. Like it shuts off unless you are the super exceptional, Olympic wrestler, Jordan Burroughs kind of guy, where like you can make this work. So yeah, I didn't have the idea that I was going to be a professional athlete, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. That was kind of one of the issues. I knew that I enjoyed the outdoors, and there was a part of me, and there still is that part of me that's like, man, I just want to go to Alaska and live in a cabin and and be that guy. Like I feel like I could do it. So yeah, everything kind of just fell into place being a UFC athlete.
So talk about that. Talk about how you pivoted over from high school and college athletics to the UFC, because it was a path before you got to the UFC and before you got signed by the UFC that you had to ultimately tread before you could get to, the premier mixed martial arts organization.
I wrestled through high school. Once I got into high school, I stopped playing football and baseball because I was too small. Just focused on wrestling, and I wrestled. I went to Virginia Tech, and I got in for engineering. I didn't have plans to wrestle, and then that fidgety ADD kid was like, I just can't stay away, So I ended up emailing the coach, and I walked on pretty late, and things kind of just happened. And a few weeks later, I was starting for a Division I wrestling program. That was a huge learning experience for me, being surrounded by a group of very good wrestlers every day. It was also a learning experience in not having a group of coaches that were like there for my success. Definitely learned from, the positive side of having good training partners and the negative side of having crummy coaches. I only wrestled the year at Virginia Tech, and because I did not enjoy the coaching staff. And I was taking some time off from school because like I said, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I went there for engineering, and I was a few months into it, and I was like, man, like this. One, I was wrestling and cutting weight to 141s, and that made things extremely difficult to be a student at that point, because I was focusing so much on like making weight, because I was wrestling at a weight class that I shouldn't have been wrestling at. Yeah, I took some time off, and at that point I'd been a fan of the UFC and mixed martial arts and Pride fighting championships, the one in Japan. And my brother and I were working for our father, framing houses, and anytime that one of those pay-per-view cards would come on, we would get the card and watch. And it took a few months, and finally it was like, all right, we just need to do it. We need to find a place and go train. And looked it up on the internet and found the closest school that had a fight team. And at that point it was like a 40-minute drive from where we live in Sparta. And
Jim, this is your brother Dan, who's also a UFC fighter as well, right? Or was a UFC fighter.
Yeah, my brother Dan. So yeah,
he was an awesome fighter too. Big fan of Dan's as well.
Thank you. Yeah, he fought a who's who at 185. Really did. Yeah. So in 2005, started training. The first day we walked into the gym, we're talking to, our first coach, and we're like, hey, we want to fight. And he saw these two, young wrestler kids come in, and he's like, oh, well, give me like 2 to 3 years, and he already had a few guys that were fighting, and some were doing pretty well on the local scene. We ended up doing a grappling tournament a few months later, and I mean, lo and behold, it was 6 months basically to the day that we walked in to start training that we were walking into a ring for our first professional fights, because at that point in New Jersey, there was no amateur. It was either fight like on the underground or go pro. So we decided to go pro, and things just snowballed from there. And I think I had 6 fights in 366 days, from the time that we started fighting.
Wow. So you were like the Mike Tyson of mixed martial arts, right? So I want to walk back to one piece of your story that you raised with us, which is the coaching issue, right? Mm-hmm. Coaching is a really important part of a Lyme disease journey. And I think there's 2 different elements of that I'd like to explore with you, right? So you said that at that stage in your life as an athlete, you had seen some good coaches and some bad coaches, right? So talk to us about what were the factors that led you to believe someone was a good coach, and what were the factors that allowed you to come to the conclusion that you were working with a bad coach, so that folks who are working with coaches, and we'll talk about doctors in a minute, can have some parameters for what tools you use to define whether somebody's a good coach or a bad coach.
There's a lot that goes into that, right? So there's different styles to coaching. The biggest thing that led me to believe that the coaches that I was dealing with at that point were bad. There was no support, right? I was just a body to throw on the mat at that point. They weren't worried about my success and my failure, only to the point where it reflected on them. That's it. That's all they cared about, is how my performance reflected on them. And even to that point, being the walk-on and being the guy that just showed up and started wrestling that was handed to them, the better that I did, it made it look even worse for them, because they had spent scholarship money on these other guys who weren't producing. So I think one of the biggest things, and this is something that I've learned, through the years with coaching, is the ability to read, right? Like you have to be able to read the person that you're coaching and the athlete or even the patient, right? So like, you have to know when that good day is, when that bad day is. Like, and I mean, that's one of the biggest issues in the sport of mixed martial arts, is that we'll have, our hard sparring day. Not everybody's at 100%, so if the guy that's a little bit later into his career isn't having a good day that day, and you're throwing him in there with these young, crazy lions, that's how injuries happen, and that's how problems arise. A coach has to be able to read their athlete and be like, okay, is today the day that we go hard, or is today the day that we kind of pull things back? And there has to be that open communication, because without the communication, nobody's ever going to know, and as the athlete, you have to be able to voice that as well. It's a delicate line, because certain coaching styles are different. Some coaches and some athletes thrive with that little bit harder coaching style, no fluff. Honestly, I feel I do pretty well with that, but I also need coaches that, have my back.
So Jim, let's talk about another piece of that, right? One of the biggest challenges that people have in the Lyme community is A, knowing when to pivot from a doctor to another doctor, mm-hmm. and B, really having sort of the fortitude to make the decision to leave someone. Now you're an 18-year-old kid, mm-hmm. You're at a Division I school, you walk on, you're having success at a sport that you were essentially groomed to be a part of from birth, right? Mm-hmm. Yet you have the fortitude to leave that program. So talk about you and what your mindset had to be, and what you had to go through to have the strength to leave an unhealthy coach, and what kind of a model can that serve for folks who have to leave doctors, especially these celebrity doctors that people sometimes work with.
You have to trust your gut. When you feel that the relationship isn't there, when you feel that the support might not be there, or that you're just a number, it's okay. It's okay to move on. I've always had an easy time of just like, okay, we're good. Like when it's time for me, it's time for me, and I'm done. I don't like to hang on too long to those types of relationships. So it can be really difficult going from a little bit of something to, just like jumping out into the abyss and not having anything, any support, any guidance. But if you feel that relationship is tainted and soured and, not healthy anymore, then it's time to go.
So Jim, you're a guy who follows his gut. You followed your gut from place to place to place, which ultimately brought you to a place where you are a legend in one of the top professional organizations in the world. And it was always that gut that led you. So talk to us about, while you're going through this legendary career and you're fighting sort of like the Mike Tyson of UFC, where you're sort of fighting every other day, it seemed at some point, right, Jim? You just fought and fought in a sport that wears you down, right? I mean, this is a tough sport. Talk to us about when you first started to notice you had some health issues, which you now know to be related to Lyme disease.
The first really noticeable symptoms hit me probably in early 2015. I began experiencing pretty significant joint pain, particularly in my knees. It was to the point where I would be warmed up in the middle of a training session, 45 minutes in, and I would go to stand up and I'd have to post on my knees and stand up like an old man, grunting and groaning. Joint pain was probably the first thing. I mean, there might have been a little bit of maybe some of the neurological stuff that I ended up dealing with might have started hitting me a little bit earlier, but I feel like I can 100% say that the joint pain was the first thing that I really noticed. And through 2015, it started to get to the point where I was struggling going up and down stairs. Going upstairs, I'd be grabbing onto the handrail and pulling myself up, and going downstairs for whatever reason. One day I just decided to turn sideways because it felt better on my knees going down that way, where I wasn't like fully jarring, the front of my knees as I walked down the stairs. It progressed pretty good, and we got to like, I was getting neuropathy and stuff like that. Those types of things got worse and worse through 2015.
So Jim, let's explore that in a little more detail, right? You're a genetically gifted professional athlete, but you're participating in a combat sport. When do you first start seeing doctors, or are you just sort of describing your symptoms or rationalize your symptoms as part of just being a UFC athlete?
I assumed that the symptoms that I was dealing with were associated with being a professional fighter for a decade. It's like, knee pain, check that off the list. Of course your knees hurt. I've got neck injuries. It's like, oh, your arms are going numb. That's obvious. I started developing some speech issues towards late 2015, where it's like, I do get hit in the head. So I assumed that everything that I was dealing with was associated with just being a fighter.
So were you seeking advice from trainers, from doctors? I mean, when are you starting to seek help? Because even if you didn't think it was part of a Lyme disease journey, you certainly are a dad, and you're certainly a husband, and you don't want to be punch drunk. So when are you starting to get help, for these symptoms?
Well, you know what? Honestly, I never really approached anybody about it. I was kind of just riding it out, and I was coming into a fight in early 2016 at UFC 296. My training camp was horrible, absolutely horrible. I was barely able to train. I was like, okay, I just need to get through this one, UFC 196 rather. I just need to get through this fight, and I'm going to ask to fight on UFC 200, and I'm going to retire at UFC 200. And that was my plan.
So who did you fight at 196? Is that Diego Sanchez?
Yes, Diego Sanchez. Yep.
You had this terrible camp. You have all of these symptoms, which you now know to be clearly Lyme disease symptoms.
Yep.
You're fighting against, again, another UFC legend, another winner of the Ultimate Fighter. He did win the Ultimate Fighter, right, Sanchez?
Yes.
I think he did. So you're fighting against a legend, right? I mean, one of the most fit, aggressive athletes in the world, and you're so sick that you can't train. I mean, how did that go for you in that fight?
It did not go my way. He ended up outpointing me and taking a decision, and it was a tough fight. He's a tough dude. That's the way that it goes. Like I said, it was a horrible, horrible training camp, and I had assumed that everything that I was dealing with was just because of my lifestyle
Or your profession.
Or my profession, right? Yeah, just because of being a fighter. I was 100% fixed on calling it quits at UFC 200. I was getting my pre-fight physical for UFC 196, and I was talking to my doctor about some of the things that I was going through. I mentioned all, the joint pain and the neuropathy and the twitching and the speech issues. I was like, and I'm like, I feel like I'm getting lost sometimes because I was experiencing some brain fog to where I would walk into a room and I would just stand there. I would just find myself standing there for 15, 20 minutes. Like I would go to clean up the basement or something like that, or my workshop, and kind of get lost in the task and be overwhelmed by it and not even get to start. And just, I knew what I was there to do. It wasn't that I was forgetting what I was going into the room for. It was just that I didn't know how to start. So talking to my doctor about all those things, he's like, I think you have Lyme disease.
Really?
It was as easy as that. He had dealt with a few patients in the past that had it, and we ran some blood tests. I was actually out in Las Vegas for the fight, and he calls me up and he's like, according to the blood test, he's like, you didn't test positive for Lyme. I still to this day never have. But he's like, your body is fighting an active infection right now. And he's like, so we're going to try some doxycycline when you come home. He's like, if it's Lyme disease, you're going to notice a difference pretty quickly. So I got through that fight, got home, went on the doxycycline. It was how quickly I noticed the change in the way that I felt was pretty incredible.
Now, did you go on oral doxycycline or did you go on IV antibiotics?
Oral. Yep.
So now so you got the news that you had Lyme disease before the fight with Diego Sanchez.
Yes.
So now, what was your reaction when the doctor said to you, "Hey, Jim, I think you have Lyme disease"? Was that a disease you were familiar with? Was it something that that surprised you, or was the Lyme disease possibility on your radar even before the doctor told you had Lyme?
It wasn't really in my mind that I had Lyme disease. I had been tested in the past, and that's actually when I think I was bit. Back in 2013, I had a few weeks that I felt like crap, to be perfectly honest. I had like flu-like symptoms, a severe nausea, to the point where taking a sip of coffee in the morning, if I got a good whiff of my coffee as I took a sip, I'd start to gag a little bit. Or taking the garbage out, I had two kids in diapers at the time, so taking the garbage out, I would be like dry heaving all the way down the driveway, and that lasted for like a week, right? And then I got a series of migraines, and over, I think it was 10 days, I got 7 migraines, light sensitivity, and a little bit of vertigo. And I went to a neurologist, and I went to an ENT at that time. They tested me for Lyme disease, and they ran a whole bunch of other tests, and nothing came back positive. So they're like, okay, we're just going to wait until something comes back, because, the symptoms had kind of gone away. Yeah, and that was in 2013, and the symptoms came back in 2015. And it took me a long time to, even after I knew that I had Lyme disease, to figure out when I was bit, because I never found a tick, never got a rash. Now, knowing what I know about the early symptoms, I'm extremely confident that it was like late May, early June in 2013.
So let's explore that, Jim, because perhaps you were bitten by a tick at that time, or perhaps you engaged in some behavior that was immune disrupting, and this bacteria that you were harboring in your body for perhaps decades, as a kid who grew up in New Jersey, as a kid who was in the Lyme Belt, who was a kid who was bitten by ticks many times, whether you knew it or not.
Yeah.
Perhaps there was some immune disruptive behavior that you would engage in, and it just allowed the bacteria to take off. So what were you doing around that time in 2013 from a training standpoint? Meaning, what were you getting ready for, and what kind of training were you doing? And do you think it's possible that your training regimen caused immune disruption, and that's why you got sick?
At that point, I can't think of anything different at that point. There was really nothing that I can think of that stands out that would cause it. To be perfectly honest.
What about when you were sparring and training? Do you recall having any sparring sessions which may have been physically traumatic? Did anybody take a shot on the button one day and just find yourself in a bad place? I mean, there are just so many different possibilities with somebody who does what you do professionally that could have been traumatic and could have been immune disrupting.
Honestly, I think at the time I was actually out of the gym for a bit. I was rehabbing my shoulder, doing some physical therapy on my shoulder for an injury that I'd sustained late in 2012. So I wasn't even like training in any crazy way. I was probably training a lot less than I, than I had been.
But Jim,
up to that.
you did have an injury, right? And one of the things that we see, on this podcast is that there are many people who suffer an injury. Their immune system is focusing on that injury, and as a result, the bacteria can take off. So the injury may have been the immune disrupting event. And again, I don't know. I'm just exploring this with you. But one of the things that I did want to explore with you before Matt starts to talk to you about your healing journey is, I remember when Conor McGregor was the coach of The Ultimate Fighter. Mm-hmm. And he talked about his training philosophy, which seemed to be very different than the philosophy of a lot of the people who were coaching and training in the UFC. And he had a more gentle approach to training. And I'm just wondering, whether or not sort of your personality and your training style, which clearly was rigorous, you're always pushing yourself, which is very different than Conor's style, may have had an impact on, your immune system and its ability to fight off, I'm sure, these various microbes that your body had been managing for probably the entirety of your life.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I've always been good at pushing myself, right? And that's why I've been able to be successful taking a lot of short notice fights, is because I can get into shape pretty quickly. Right. because I'm capable of pushing myself day to day. But yeah, I mean, maybe it had some effect on it.
Jim, let's now talk about how things change for you personally and professionally after you get your diagnosis, right? You're getting ready to retire. You want UFC 200 to be, a time in your life where, it's a landmark UFC event. Mm-hmm. You want to go out at a time when it's a landmark event. But the good news for you is it's really not that you're punch drunk. It's not that you are, suffering from arthritis from too many different injuries. You have a disease that hopefully you believe can be treated, and perhaps your career is not going to end. So was this exciting to have a diagnosis? Were you really hopeful that this might extend your career? And also talk to us about socially. Were you now able to explain to your wife and other people in your life that you had something going on that was not going to be career ending?
It was a huge burden, lifted off my shoulders, knowing that I could fix what was going on, that I had a new opponent, right? And now that I knew the opponent, I feel that since that point, every fight that I've had the opportunity to be a part of since then has been a gift, because I already made that decision. I already made the decision to walk away from the sport that I love. And fortunately, I was able to control it. I was able to take it back and refocus myself and get my body back. It took a while, but the burden that was lifted, knowing that I'm fighting Lyme disease and not just a deteriorated joints and this and that, has really changed my outlook on a lot of it, on my career and life in general at this point. And yeah, it's been easier to kind of open up about it and tell people, because while I was struggling with some of those things, I wasn't really telling anybody about them. I wasn't talking about it because it's like, hey, this is what you get. It's what I thought it was, right? I thought it was like, hey, you want to be a professional fighter for 10 years, it's going to hurt to walk. But now it's a lot easier to talk about the things that I was going through at that point.
So Jim, let's talk about that a little bit more, because you were quoted with MMA Junkie saying that you didn't want people to know what was going on with you, right? So was that pre-diagnosis, or did some of that carry forward into post-diagnosis with Lyme disease as well, where you didn't really want to share your diagnosis and what was going on with your health?
It was pre-diagnosis. I thought that it was like, okay, well, you're beat up, right? You're beat up from being a fighter, and you got to sleep in the bed you made. I got through that fight at UFC 200. I felt way better than I did at the fight at 196. I told the media that night that I was dealing with it. I try to use my platform to speak about it, but I also don't want to make it like the only thing that I talk about. So it's not something that I try to bring up in every interview and stuff like that as well. So, because it's still a fight, and I feel like at this point, like I've got a handle on things. So a fight's a fight. I can win them or I can lose them, and I don't have to always hang this thing over and push it out there every time that there's a bump in the road.
That's the best approach we feel to this illness, because it can become your identity. And when that happens, sometimes you're going to get sick, right? So you need to have that balance of awareness and education and advocating using your platform, which you certainly do. And we're so thankful for you for doing, Jim, but also for your own health, to not make it become your life and your identity, because that's not good for you as somebody who is, currently dealing with Lyme disease, and you've obviously overcome it and you're doing well. But we know we're going to get to shortly, you had a relapse, and relapses can occur with Lyme disease. So that's really, I think, a good approach to this. So once you got diagnosed, you kind of did pivot, and we have some quotes here from you saying that you didn't want people to go through what you're going through. You didn't want them to experience it themselves, and you didn't want them to have loved ones experience it. And that's really when I think you started to open up and advocate about Lyme disease, right? What I want to explore with you more about this, though, is Rich asked you, did you know about how bad ticks can be? What were you doing to protect yourself from ticks? Did you know about Lyme disease? But the question I have for you, Jim, is did you realize how bad Lyme disease can be? Because over 500,000 people in the United States alone every year get Lyme disease. And now we're suggesting that these numbers could be even higher, right? These are reported cases in the US alone. And we had Dr. Tim Haystad from Duke University on this podcast who told us 36% of those people every year are developing late-stage persistent chronic Lyme that they have to battle with. That's a really, really large number of people battling this disease. And frankly, when I got diagnosed, I had no idea how bad it could be. So did you realize when you got diagnosed that this could be a serious illness that's not just something that, I get the flu and I get a little bit better?
I didn't know at that point. Like, when I got diagnosed, it was like, okay, I've known some people that have dealt with it. Some had a tougher road than others. And as I got into the community a little bit more, then I got to see just how bad things can get. It's a hell of a little fucking bugger, and the worst part is that it's completely individual. It's a really tough thing that we're dealing with. And in this fight against it, trying to figure out what exactly we're dealing with. And I didn't know just how deep this rabbit hole goes when I got diagnosed. I knew how I felt at the time, and I felt considerably better in a few weeks. So it was like, oh, okay, well, we're good to go. Like, we got this one.
And Jim, you were quoted again as saying that you're one of the lucky ones, right? And you realize that some people get it worse. But let's put this in perspective. I mean, you were a professional athlete, you were fighting, you were a star, and then you couldn't walk up and down the stairs, right? I mean, you had neuropathy, you couldn't move your arms, right? As much as you say other people have it worse, I mean, you were pretty freaking sick from Lyme disease, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty sick, but I'm a hard-headed SOB. So, and I was also at the point too where I was providing for my family and supporting a business with my fighting career. So, like, I was between a rock and a hard place. I didn't really have much that I could do about it. I was trying to fight and win and keep, everything kind of moving and going. But I still feel like there are a lot of folks that have dealt with way worse than I dealt with. I think the fact that I was forced by my profession to keep training and to keep working out through this. And like, even though there were days where it was next to impossible to get out of bed, and I missed a lot of training sessions in the last two fights, like leading up to my diagnosis, because I couldn't get out of bed in the morning. But like, it's still think the fact that like the only thing that I was doing was working out and doing things that lead to better health is one of the things that kind of helped me either stave it off or get over it. It's tough when you see just how bad it can get.
Yeah, but let's go a little bit deeper on that one, right? Because I think your mindset, I want to carry this theme forward, because you talked to Rich about what it was like when you were young and you had coaches that you didn't see eye to eye with, and you had to make decisions that weren't easy to say, I know this isn't best for me, I'm going to move on, and ultimately landed you where you are today, this leading star in the UFC. So I think those attributes and those traits carried forward into your Lyme journey, where you refused to give up. You were listening to your body, you were listening to your body's signals and saying, I'm going to do what I need to do based on what my body's telling me, and I'm going to get better, right? So we interviewed Dr. Burascano, who's one of the leading Lyme litter doctors in the world, and he talked to us about no matter how sick you are, you have to move, otherwise you won't get better from Lyme disease. And you just talked to us about, hey, I was so sick, I could barely get out of bed in the morning. I could barely walk down the stairs, but I kept training and moving no matter what happened. And I believe, Jim, that that's one of the main reasons you were able to overcome this the way you did, because movement is so important. And these studies, these scientific studies that are done by leading specialists in the tick-borne illness community prove that time and time again. And in fact, this podcast has proved that. So do you think that your mindset, your attitude towards life, and just your motivation to keep moving helped you overcome this in a way that you maybe wouldn't have been able to if you just said, I'm going to lay in bed because I'm so sick and just not move today?
I do think it had a positive effect on my experience. and it's hard because it's like, well, it's hard for me to say it to other people. Like I want to suggest it, like, hey, you need to do things that are going to help build your health. Good diet, exercise, sleep, like the basic things that we all know. And for me to get out of bed and do one thing that day, well, it's okay. I get on the treadmill because then it's part of my job, right? Like it's easier for me. Like, well, if your job is something else, or you provide for your family in a different way, and then that workout is something extra. And I don't know if I had anything extra in me at that point. I really don't, because I could barely train enough. I mean, I wasn't training enough to be fighting. That was still like, that's the only thing I had to do, was get up and get out of bed and go do something. Like I said, a little on the treadmill, or hit some pads or something like that. My given profession was like a privilege in my fight against Lyme, because not everybody makes their living working out, but I want to try to help people, like, hey, you need to do this. You need to move. You need to try to do things that are going to build your health.
And you're being very kind here, Jim, but I could tell you from my own personal experience, in all these areas that seem so simple now to me, and that you've been practicing your whole life, are areas that I failed in for many years until starting to learn and talk to people in this community like you, Jim. Like you talked about diet, exercise, and sleep. I was in a constant state of fight or flight. My nervous system was haywire and I wasn't sleeping. And I didn't realize how big of a deal that was for me to heal. Diet-wise, I felt like complete shit. And what did I do? I wanted comfort food. I go get a Frosty from Wendy's and think, oh, I'm just going to feel better. And that was the worst thing I could have done, right? So all these things are so important, and I failed at them for so many years until I realized how important diet and sleep and exercise are. And, I understand that you're saying some people, that was your job. That was your number one thing to do, was to exercise. But I'm going to argue that no matter what people's jobs are in life, they have to make changes to incorporate movement into their lives. Otherwise, they are going to either slow down or inhibit their healing journey. We've had people in this podcast that were bedbound. One of our friends, Nick Terensky, he had to literally stretch and do yoga laying in bed just to get his joints moving, his muscles going, blood flowing. And then that allowed him, little by little, he started to get up and walk. And it was tough for him to even walk because his muscles are so atrophied, but he had to fight, and it wasn't easy. But if he just said, I'm going to be on the computer and running my business, which he had a very successful business, and I'm not going to try to move, he would have continued to decline. So I think we need to make time to do that so we can heal no matter what our life circumstances are, even if movement is not our number one priority like yours was, Jim. I mean, what do you think about that?
I agree. The pillars, right? The pillars of health. It's super simple stuff. Like, get some exercise, eat good food. And good is a very ambiguous word, but we all know what good food is and what not so good food is. And like sleep. I mean, sleep is one of those things that in the last like year and a half or so, like I slept pretty well, and getting through the Lyme, I slept okay. Man, like I've been making a significant effort to get like those 8 hours of sleep in the last like year and a half. It's a performance enhancing drug. I mean, it's so stupid too, because it's like, hey, get 8 hours of sleep, and it's like, no, man, I'm gonna rise and grind like 5 hours. Like, and my issue has always been, there's that period between like 6 hours to 7.5 where I wake up and I feel like shit. Get less than that, I make it, I get through, but like I wake up and I'm up and I'm ready to go. Like after that 6 to 7.5, I wake up and I feel like crap, and then it's hard for me to get going. But then it's like I get 8 and it's like, whew, I'm a whole different guy, and like one of my experiences with like even working out with it is that I've seen some stuff in the past. I don't know if it's changed as of recently, but there's a lot of suggestions that like aerobic exercise was harder to do or worse for you with Lyme disease, where I felt that anaerobic was, I couldn't touch it. I couldn't lift, I couldn't sprint, I couldn't do anything because my nervous system was so shot that like if I tried to do a sprint, or if I tried to like do some like live workouts with my training partners, some grappling and stuff like that, where it's kind of crossing the line between aerobic and anaerobic, like I'd be so banged up. But it was easy for me to just turn the treadmill on and just go for a little bit. That nice long slow, steady workout was easier for me. And I've seen some things in the past that is like kind of contrary to what the typical belief was. But I think honestly, just that movement, just doing something to make one little bit of progress is what we got to do. Like you have to.
For sure. And we've had, another doctor, Dr. Cameron, who's another Lyme specialist on this podcast. And he said the same thing, that you have to move, but you can't go before I got sick, I was an avid runner. I'd run 10 miles every day and go hard. And he said, you can over exercise and that actually will make it harder for you to heal. And you're hurting yourself. You're making it harder. So when you have Lyme disease, you have to actually do what you suggested. Go on the treadmill, walk slowly. You don't want to go on a sprint. You don't want to go hardcore, especially while you're treating and while you're recovering. And he also suggested that you do it every other or every 3 days you exercise, because you have to give your body time to recover, especially when you're really sick from Lyme disease. So it is kind of different than what we're taught to, know about exercising, but there is a certain way to approach movement that is going to be helpful for you in healing and not hurtful for you in healing. In fact, we interviewed Gina Vales, who is a fitness guru, she's an influencer in the fitness world. And she struggled with this because she was just going hard. And she kept having all these crazy relapses, but she was sleeping. She had her diet right. And she was exercising, but she was exercising way too hard. Her doctors finally said, you got to take it easy because you're killing yourself with over exercising. And she found that she's now been able to get herself in a place where she can sustain remission and stay healthy because she's not overdoing it anymore. So that is really important in this world when you're suffering with late stage Lyme and you're recovering from tick-borne illness. So that I think is really important. But I do want to talk to you in addition to the physical elements of Lyme disease. I know you did talk about a lot when you started speaking publicly about your illness, that there's a whole mental side to this as well, right? I mean, it's not just I feel like shit physically, but mentally there's a whole component to this that we don't hear enough about in the Lyme world. So can you share with us what you meant by that when you publicly said, hey, look, it was really mentally difficult for me too?
The lack of confidence in my body, really, like I went from like, oh man, like I go into the Octagon and I can outwork anybody, to, my style of fighting had kind of changed. And it was just, I knew that I wasn't competing to my strengths, because I know what my strengths at least definitely were at that point, which was just step on the gas. Like it was really pretty simple. Just go as hard as you can go for as long as you can. And, and if my corner needs to pick me up at the end of the fight, they pick me up. Like, and then kind of like losing that, it was really difficult. Learning to adapt to it and learning to accept, like that, okay, there have been some changes. There are some changes in the way that I'm going to have to fight and the way that I have to perform as an athlete. And some of that comes with age and some of that comes with the Lyme disease. And who knows what is what at this point. It sucks. It fucking sucks, because I know what I was capable of doing, and then I had this like really tough few years, and I'm a few years older at this point now, so like who knows what could have been. But I've always been the type that I don't really care about it. I don't focus on any of that stuff. Like I look at what's right in front of me and I get past that. I don't dwell in the past. And like these fights where I had a crummy fight and I had a crummy camp because of Lyme, whatever. I was there. I signed the contract to do it. I had got the opportunity. I got paid to do it. So I'm not worried about the past at this point.
So you must blend these two together, right? Because we talked about the physical, we talked about the mental, but there's a connection there. And I feel like, with the movement, and the more you're able to get your body moving, you're going to create endorphins, which are the happy chemicals, and you're going to counter some of these emotional thoughts that you're having, that you're starting to think, wow, I can't trust my body. Oh my goodness, I'm really sick. So you're countering the emotional and mental consequences of Lyme with movement. So did you find that the more you continue to train, the more you were able to overcome the mind fuck that is Lyme disease?
Yeah, honestly. And it was a long kind of haul, right? It took a while to finally feel like I could train like I should, for me to finally get over things, and probably wasn't until early 2018. Just that continued little push, right? Like it's really, it comes down to basic health stuff, right? Like we need to move. We need to do that stuff. Like you lock an animal in a cage and it can't do the things that it's supposed to do. It loses a lot of stuff. It loses its mind, it loses its body, it loses its ability to reproduce. You really start screwing with the animal, and when it comes right down to it, that's exactly what we are. So, being trapped by not only society's restraints, but then this thing on us, this Lyme disease, you can't let it affect what we as humans, as animals need to do, which is eat good food, sleep as much as we can, and work out.
For some reason, there seems to be more females and males in the Lyme community. And, we've speculated that could be genetic there, it could be a variety of factors, but a lot of the females, so we've actually had female guest co-hosts in the past. And a lot of the female guests we've had have shared with female guest co-hosts that Lyme disease has impacted them in their romantic relationships because it really, as you noted, it really changes you, right? And they share that it just completely obliterates their sex drive, and their partner felt like, hey, like, what's going on? Like, you don't, and it's really had an impact on the relationships. And then we've had men reach out to us privately saying, hey, look, Matt, you're a guy, you suffer with this. How do you deal with this? Because my sex drive is gone. My partner thinks that that it's hard, and it's really hard to deal with. So what impacts, I guess the first question is, was that ever a problem with you? And how did you communicate with your wife, your kids, et cetera, as you were struggling with this? And it was sort of changing who you were temporarily, and you were fighting this battle to get your health back.
I didn't notice any effect on my sex drive. I'm going to be fully honest. There's parts of me that are still 15 years old. But it definitely affected relationships. It adds stress. It adds stress to the relationships. And that was just like the compound of everything, right? It was because physically I felt like crap. It was because mentally I was not as sharp as I needed to be. And like I said, dealing with brain fog. And so like, it definitely did stress a lot of those relationships. Like I said, it was hard for me to sit on the floor and play with my kids. So I wasn't doing that as much as I wanted to, which not only affected them because I wasn't playing with them as much, but it affected me because I wanted to play with them and I just felt like crap and I couldn't. It just added stress, unneeded stress to all the relationships.
I want to circle back because one of the things that we get often from people is when they start to reintroduce movement into their life, it's hard to deal with the recovery. So you overdo it. You get this like, oh, why did I do that? And then you stop moving. So for you, when you were at your worst, Jim, how did you have to change your exercise regimen, and how did you respond to the movement and the exercise from a recovery standpoint to be able to balance that? Okay, I don't want to overdo it and get myself more sick, but I have to keep moving. What was that like for you?
It wasn't easy. Like I know what I can do now, right? Like, and I know what I can do hard, and it's taken some time to like kind of work around those things of like, okay, well, there's so many different aspects of mixed martial arts, right? So we've got the stand-up aspects, you've got wrestling, you've got then like groundwork, grappling. And then there's also being an athlete. So for a while there, like I said, I wasn't able to really lift or like do sprints, which was a big part of who I was as an athlete before I got sick. I mean, I ended up losing in 2016, I ended up losing almost 15 pounds of muscle. The combination of being on doxycycline and that just ripping my insides out. But then, just putting in consistent work that was conditioning, long, slow state cardio stuff, as opposed to, still lifting. I kind of just learned to really listen to myself, like I was talking about coaching before, and like, hey, you have to, see like what the athlete, like, is today a good day? Is today a bad day for the athlete? And I consider myself pretty coachable. Like if somebody asked me to do something, I'd do it. And one of the benefits that I had is I had my own gym. So I was the one in control. So it's like, hey, today's not a good day. Today is not my day that I push hard. So it was a lot easier for me to take a step back and tone it down on days that I felt like I couldn't go as hard as everybody else was going, because I didn't have, that head coach or whatever in my ear, like, hey, stop being a wuss. Let's get in there. Right. And it's like, no, like it took a level of maturity to really be able to like throw that gauge on myself and step on the brakes, step on the brakes as opposed to stepping on the gas. Like, because I learned that like, hey, if I do go too deep, then I'm banged up for 3-4 days, where it's like, I'm trying to make that consistent growth and those consistent gains. So that takes being on the mats for me. That's, 6 days a week.
I like your comment about that. You really had to be mature, right? You had to listen to your body, and if you overdid it and you pushed yourself too hard, all right, you felt like shit, but you're going to bounce back and make an adjustment and then continue on your healing journey. And that word maturity for me sticks out because so many people get sick with Lyme and they just say, I can't move, I can't do anything, I can't treat. And they think of every excuse in the book to not take steps forward because they're afraid, because they really believe that they can't get better from this, right? But Jim, you all along were like, once you had that diagnosis, you're like, I'm going to beat Lyme disease. I'm going to kick its ass. I'm going to get my life back. And you did, right? So I think that maturity is what dictates when certain people are going to just fight forward versus they're just going to do nothing because they are thinking, I can't get better and I'm not going to keep pushing forward. So I think that's a really powerful word you use to describe that. So let's just put this in perspective. So all of 2015, you're sick. You finally get your diagnosis in early 2016. I mean, you're at the point where you're 32 years old. You're about to announce to the world that you're going to retire because you think, I'm 32. I got the shit kicked out of me my whole life for a living, although you kick a lot of people's asses for the most part. And you're saying, hey, I'm going to retire. But you get your Lyme diagnosis. You choose not to do that. And, a little kind of jumping ahead here, but you start to get better and you start to kick ass again and start just winning a ton of fights and really getting your life and your career back. So when you first started taking the doxycycline, many people have what's called a Herxheimer reaction, which means, you get worse before you get better, or it's inflammation due to the kill off of the bacteria from Lyme disease. Did you experience that? Or do you think that you were moving so much that you were able to flush these toxins out of you so quickly because you were moving while treating?
Well, in the first stint on doxycycline, I experienced it a little bit, nothing too crazy. I'd have a day or two here and there where I felt a little banged up. I felt a little extra sore. I felt a little extra tired. Nothing too crazy. Yeah, that first couple of months there. When it came back is when I really experienced those. So I was on doxycycline for 6 months. Felt day and night better than I did.
How long did it take, Jim, for you to get to that point? You were on doxy for 6 months. At what point did you start to feel like, wow, holy shit, I'm feeling better?
It took me like 6 weeks, 8 weeks, where I was like, like, wow, like this is it. Like we're getting it, That first round of doxycycline, though, it completely changed my insides. I was going to the bathroom 4 to 5 times before noon. Like it just, even with probiotics and stuff like that, it was just banging me up. I was on it for about 6 months, and I was like, hey doc, do you think we beat it? Like, can I go off the doxycycline, please? And he's like, yeah, let's give it a shot. I think it was just about 7 weeks from the time that I stopped taking the doxycycline to where the symptoms started to come back again. Me being me, I was like, well, is that Lyme disease or is that something else? So I don't want to poop so much again. Were
there any other side effects to the doxy besides the GI issues?
No, not really.
Light sensitivity, burning things like that.
Yeah, occasionally. More so when I got back on it, I noticed the light sensitivity with it. I did give myself ulcer, esophageal ulcer, once or twice, because I took it and then I went to bed and you wake up like, my throat hurts. But yeah, it was like 7 weeks that I was off it, started coming back, and I was like, okay, let's see if it's actually coming back, or if I don't want to jump to conclusions here.
Well, wait a second. This is the guy who listens to his body, who has intuition, who knows what's going on. So did you really know, and you just didn't want to go back on the docs? You're like, shit, I don't want to have my stomach issues again. So did you just like kind of fool yourself into thinking it wasn't back at that point?
Yeah, probably fooled myself. Like, no, your eyes twitching just because, that happens sometimes.
That's normal.
Right?
Yeah.
It's normal. So it was like, it came on pretty quickly at that point, and then it just hammered me because I was trying to do everything right, and like, okay, well, I need to take my supplements 2 hours before, 2 hours after. I could never take it on an empty stomach because it would make my stomach upset. So then I'm trying to like plan out my supplement schedule, and it just never worked. I could just never get everything in because I like to work out fasted. On the days where I'm training later in the day, a lot of times I'll go until 2 or 3 p.m. until I eat a significant amount of food. Maybe I'll have a granola bar or a shake or something like that. But I don't like to work out with food in my stomach. Not having any food in my stomach and then taking a crap ton of pills doesn't work out. So I was training for a fight at UFC, 208 in Brooklyn. Dustin Poirier was fighting. Yeah, it was kicking my ass. The Lyme had come back and I wasn't consistent on the doxycycline.
So what were your symptoms, Jim? So this is, you're off doxy, you're 7 weeks in, You're starting to feel like shit and you're saying, is it Lyme? Am I, so you're not back on the doxy. So what were your symptoms? You mentioned that you had eye twitching. What symptoms came back, and were there any new symptoms at this point before you went back on the doxy?
The level of fatigue was like, I mean, if I was at like a 7, the year prior, I was at like a 12. Like I could barely do anything. I remember this was maybe a month before the fight. So I'd been working out, and like I was coming off of UFC 205, where I was probably in some of the best shape of my life, conditioning wise. Had still been training, but then it started kicking my butt. So then it was kind of keeping me away from training as hard as I should have been. And one of my guys did like it doesn't really add anything to the story, but he was doing like a 24-hour roll-a-thon, right? So it screwed up our sparring session because a bunch of guys came in and rolled with him at like odd hours of the night. So like I show up for sparring and there's like 2 guys there. So I ended up just rolling with a couple people and just getting a little workout in, getting a sweat in. Nothing crazy. And I think I trained for like a half an hour. I literally thought I was going to like die. Like I was so banged up. I was so sore. I was so tired. Everything hurt. And it was like kind of that kick in the ass. Like you need to get this, supplement and medication schedule. Like you just suck it up and get on this thing. And, that was kind of the kick in the ass that I needed. And I got back onto things. And of course, like I had a little bit of Herxheimer week of the fight.
What did that feel like, Jim? So describe that for us, the Herxheimer reaction.
A little bit of flu-like symptoms. I had like muscle spasms in my left arm. So I was cutting weight and like my arm, I just kept kind of like, it wasn't just like that little twitch. This was like full-blown, like punching the air, sitting in a bathtub, cutting weight, and like on one side, it's like, sitting in a warm bath with Epsom salt's a good thing to do with a Herxheimer reaction. But then like, I'm going through these changes of my diet and all this stuff and workouts and rest and all that's helping me beat the Lyme and cause the Herxheimer reaction. So we got back onto our schedule and got through the fight, had a tough fight with Dustin and was pretty good with everything after that. It took a little while, but I mean, it was about another year. So that was beginning of 2017, beginning of 2018 is when I really noticed a difference in the way that I could train and push myself. That's when I was able to kind of get back into the weight room and do things that I had done to get to the level that I have gotten to.
A few follow-up questions there. So you went back on the doxy, it sounds like from 2017 to 2018-ish. How long were you back on the doxy for the second time?
Just about 2 years. Yeah. So my doctor had seen or read an article or whatever that said people that are on doxycycline for 2 years had shown that they had gotten over it. So I stayed on it. And even though I felt better in early 2018, I was like, I'm staying on it. I'm not going off of it. So I stuck on it through December 31st, 2018 is the last time that I took doxycycline. The stomach bug ripped through the family. And I rung in the new year puking, hugging the toilet. And like, it was like one of those events that like I have post-traumatic stress from. Like it was so bad. My stomach hurt so bad. And I still like to this day, we had this pasta that I used to make all the time and I can't eat it anymore. Like it's been a few years now and I can't eat it because it was such a like violent vomiting that I was like, that's it, I'm done. Fortunately I haven't had, the Lyme symptoms haven't come back. And to this day, like if I eat like crap, I mean, I feel it. Like I do. I don't get the joint pain and I don't get the numbness, but like I feel like super sluggish if I eat like crap or if I'm drinking too much alcohol. I try to avoid it. I drink socially, stuff like that. But like, if I have like a beer or two a day for a few days in a row, I'll start to feel it. I've really tried to clean up the diet. I've got the handle on the working out part. Like that's part of my life. Moving and doing physical stuff is part of my life. The diet, my family and I, my wife and I, we really clean things up and try to not super strict on like, the quintessential like Lyme diet, right? But we do avoid, like I don't eat a lot of dairy anyway. I drink alcohol, but not consistently. I don't eat a super ton of bread. I mean, gluten has never given me any issues, and sugar, I try to avoid it as well. So we eat really clean. And when I kind of hate traveling because then I end up falling out of my rhythm. And again, that might be old age. That might be, I'm pushing 40. So like that might be part of it, or it might be my stomach is still banged up, or it might be like, who the hell knows at this point. But if I'm eating like whole foods, right? Like no ingredient list type stuff, like I feel great.
So for those that can't see, because Rich has his audio off, when you said you're getting old, you're pushing 40, Rich was dying, belly laughing over there because Rich is like, that is not old. So, but I do want to ask you, Jim, because you're still having some reactions, and what are your thoughts? Because there's some disagreement among doctors in the medical community as to whether or not even 2 years of doxycycline can fully eradicate late stage Lyme, because we know it gets into your brain, to your heart, to your tissues. It gets deep in your body. And some of the bacteria becomes antibiotic resistant. It changes forms. It goes from an active spirochete to a cyst form, which is not detectable by antibiotics. So do you think that you still have some bacteria in your body, and that you're now healthy enough to manage it because you decreased the pathogenic load or the Lyme load in your body, and with the medication and your lifestyle and your diet and your sleep that you're managing it? Or do you believe that you fully eradicated the bacteria from your body?
I have absolutely no idea. I'm going to knock on wood. Hopefully I eradicated it. I don't know. The things that made me feel like so crummy in 2015, 2016, and then early 2017, I haven't been experiencing those. I do seem like I've got a sensitivity to like fried foods and stuff like that. I could eat whatever I wanted, but like now it's like I almost feel like I've got a little bit of an allergy to that type of stuff. So yeah, I don't know. I can't tell you. I wish I could.
But you've been feeling good for over 4 years now. You went off the
Yeah.
doxy in December of 2018, but you also you have a much healthier lifestyle. You're not drinking as much alcohol. You're getting more sleep. So this forced you to have an even cleaner lifestyle than you did before, which is allowing your body, regardless of whether or not the Lyme is gone or potentially just at bay, your body's managing it because you're physically healthy, you're emotionally healthy, and you're doing things you need to keep yourself healthy enough to manage any type of opportunistic bacteria or pathogen in your body, including Lyme disease, right? So what I find interesting, though, you did talk about, Jim, that when you were on the antibiotics and the doxy, you had to take supplements also, and the supplements had to be taken before the doxy. So beyond the doxycycline, what supplements were you taking? Were you doing any kind of herbs, and were the supplements just for general health, or were they for Lyme disease as well?
They were mostly for general health. I still supplement, vitamins B, all the B vitamins, C and D, omega-3s. I did a little bit of like some of the mushroom therapy type stuff, chaga and stuff like that. I don't know.
Like adaptogen type mushrooms, like the ones that are like nervous system regulating, or what type of mushrooms?
Like the chaga mushroom, and took lion's mane for a little bit as well. I don't know. That's the problem, is I don't know like what exactly helped me. I think it was everything.
It's all the above, right? The answer always is everything. Everything you did has got you to where you are today. And when people say, well, that didn't help so much, well, how do you know that wasn't part of the bigger picture that got you to where you are today, when that final thing finally worked for you? And I can tell you, all those vitamins, right? All the mushrooms. I mean, Dr. Rolls, who's this brilliant herbalist that Rich and I follow, he talks about the power of mushrooms from being an adaptogen, meaning they balance out your nervous system. They take you out of fight or flight. They put you in the rest and digest, and they allow you to heal. And there's a lot of powerful properties to mushrooms, and a lot of powerful properties to supplementing vitamins that you're deficient in because of Lyme disease. So vitamin B is really powerful in a Lyme recovery journey. So everything you were doing for general health was helping your body recover and overcome this deficiencies due to Lyme disease. Plus you were hitting it with the doxycycline. Plus you were moving your ass off, and you were determined to kick your Lyme's ass. So collectively, all these things got you where you are today, I believe. So the final thing I want to talk to you about before Rich, kind of talks about, where you are today and what you're doing today with your platform is, you kind of talked about a few things that have helped you, that are tips and tricks to people listening to this podcast that are suffering from Lyme disease. So you mentioned, hey, I was taking an Epsom salt bath, and that's supposed to help a Herxheimer reaction. So what are some things you've learned when you were kind of suffering from, the treatment from a Herx, from a, I over-exercised?
I mean, I know that like the Epsom salt baths are supposed to be pretty good for Herxheimer reactions and stuff like that. It was just happenstance that I was cutting weight in one, right? Because you sweat you sweat more in 100% humidity, right, in hot water than you do in the hottest sauna. So I think one of the biggest things is that I found is that, like, at least me personally, is I do well with like active recovery. So when I overdo it, it's not even so much just don't do anything. It's do something really light. Just move a little bit. And I've found that like over the years, like no matter what it is, whether it is like if I injured something, allowing my body to still move and kind of pump out any of the inflammation and any of that stuff is a better route to take than to just completely, shut it down and not do anything. I'm a big fan of like active recovery.
Well, that's a really great term, active recovery. And I think we're gonna borrow that, and we'll certainly credit you on future episodes and talk to other people, because it's something that I've just kind of stumbled upon in my own healing journey, that if I overdo it and I do nothing, then it's like, oh man, it's even worse. But if I overdo it and I just do a little bit the next day, then the recovery isn't as bad, right? And that's kind of what you're saying, is if you overdo it, don't be like, shit, I'm not going to do anything tomorrow, because it's going to be worse. Do a little bit, just do a little bit. That's an active recovery. I guess that's what you're referring to as active recovery, right, Jim?
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
But talk to us about the role of sweating, because you talked about the ability to sweat, and and that was a really cool statement that you gave us. And we know when you're killing off pathogens, like, especially with a broad spectrum antibiotic like doxycycline, it's killing off Lyme and probably other things you had in your body. These toxins that are released when the bacteria die have to be removed from your body. And your skin is your largest detox organ. You sweat out the die-off, or these toxins that are coming from the killing of the bacteria. So do you think that sweating was an important part of your ability to detox while treating? And how did you feel when you were sweating? Because some people tell us, oh, I felt like complete shit when I was, when I was sweating. And other people tell us it's the best feeling ever when I sweat with Lyme disease. So where do you fit in that picture?
I've always enjoyed it. Like it didn't change. There's that point of like working out when you're going at a pace that is going to make you like break a sweat. That like, I always hate that spot where it's like, I haven't started sweating yet. Like I want it to start flowing. So, I mean, that has always been me. Like I enjoy knowing that I'm putting that work in. Lyme or no Lyme, I always felt good breaking a sweat.
So, Jim, if your friend Lewis called you after this podcast and said, hey, Jim, I was just bit by a tick. What should I do? What advice would you give him so he wouldn't have to go through the same journey that you went through with Lyme disease?
I would try to point him in the right direction to find a doctor that's going to help him. A lot of the people that I know that have caught it early, they have a much better results of getting over it. So just getting after it, getting on some antibiotics right away, but then also making those lifestyle changes to like, hey, listen, you could potentially be having something going on right now. So eat well, work out, and get good sleep. Make those positive steps, because like, it's not just Lyme disease, right? Like it's not just Lyme disease. We're what, 2 years and counting in this pandemic thing. Like health matters. It really does. And unfortunately, there is no magic pill. Like there's nothing that you can take that's just going to make you healthy like that. It is all about consistency. You have to put in consistent work, whether that is diet-wise, consistently making good choices, whether that's in sleep, consistently getting good sleep, not just, oh, well, I slept for 4 hours throughout the week and then I just slept for 14 hours, over the weekend. Like, no, that's not the right path to take, and the same thing with working out. It's about consistency. That's how you make positive gains in your body, whether you're trying to put on muscle, whether you're trying to increase your cardiovascular health. If you're trying to see changes, it's all about consistency. And that's really what it would be. Like find a good doctor and then make consistent changes in those very important things that deal with our health and our wellness, like overall, and our body's ability to fight anything is putting good food in our body, getting enough rest, and working out.
Jim, now talk to us about the transformational nature of this experience, meaning how has this taught you about yourself and your superpowers in a way that you wouldn't be aware of and you wouldn't be working toward had you not gone on the Lyme disease journey?
Like I said before, like every fight that I've had at this point, since discovering that I had Lyme, it feels like a gift. There's a way of saying things, right? Like they tell you this, and I've seen it on social media. It goes around like, you don't have to work out, you get to work out, right? Like it's the way that we phrase it to ourselves makes an impact on our mental health and all this stuff as well. I haven't had to fight, but I've gotten to fight over these last couple of years. Like I've gotten that opportunity. I cherish that opportunity, and I cherish the opportunity that when I get to work out, when I get to spend time with my family, when I get to eat good, healthy, wonderful food. Like, I'm very grateful of everything at this point. Like I said, my career was hanging in the balance, and just finding out that I was fighting something was enough to like, okay, all right. Like, if I'm fighting, I'm going to fight as hard as I can. You know?
And you're pretty good at fighting, right?
Yeah, I try. You know, when I've been coaching wrestling, my boys wrestled this year, you know, I was helping out with the team. I was trying to get the kids, you know, a little motivated. And I'm like, listen, guys, like, there are only two things in this world that you have complete control over. You can't fully control your body. Like, there's stuff going on inside your body that you don't have complete control over. The only things that you can control are your effort and your attitude. The only things. You can control how hard you're going to do something, how committed you are to a cause. That's it. You are the one that's in control of, like, okay, well, I'm going to run to that post right over there, you know, like, well, are you going to run as hard as you can? Or you're not going to run as hard as you can? It's up to you. It's your choice, but you're the only one who know if you're going as hard as you can. And then your attitude, like, how are you going to deal with the hurdles? How are you going to deal with the things that get in your way? You're in control of that. So I've got this fight, and I've had this fight with Lyme disease, and that's what I did. I controlled my effort, and I controlled my attitude. I didn't let it beat me down. I didn't let it drag me down and get overwhelmed by it and get broken by it. I didn't half-ass it. You know, like, I knew that there was this thing in front of me that I had to make these choices, and I had to do these things to overcome it. And I chose to do that as hard as I could. And some days it was not easy. And there were days where I missed my medication and I forgot, or this or that, but like, I was still in the fight. I was still committed to fighting it as hard as I could.
Right, Jim, but that was something you've always done, right? And one of the things we talk about in this podcast is when we're working on our recovery, our recovery is working on us. When we're fighting Lyme disease, that's working on us. And we have to change. We have to be different, because the person who had gotten Lyme disease is not going to be the person that's going to recover from Lyme disease, right? One of the things that I think is really powerful about one of the things you just said was you had taken a lot of things for granted. You had some expectations about food and sleep and your ability to fight and so many other things. And you went from being somebody who had a lot of expectations to a person who had a lot of appreciation. And that was seems to be a radical change in who Jim Miller was. You know, the freakishly genetically gifted professional athlete now had appreciation for a lot of the things that he took for granted because he was just he had a lot of God-given gifts. So talk about that piece of this transformation in your life from someone who had a great deal of expectation to now having a lot of appreciation.
It's been, you know, it was a hard pill to swallow in the beginning of like kind of losing my gift, right? Like losing the ability to fight in a way that I knew was my best opportunity to win. All the experiences that I've been able to gain since my diagnosis, it's a gift and it's an opportunity to share, really, when it comes right down to it, to share it with the fans, to share it with my teammates, to share it with, you know, my family. I definitely was earlier in my career. I didn't care. I didn't care where I fought. I didn't care who was there or what, you know, like it didn't matter. Anyone, any place, anytime. The fans in the arena, it never really mattered to me because I was just focused on the guy in front of me. But now I really do appreciate getting the opportunity to fight in front of the crowds and sharing that opportunity and hopefully giving them the gift of a great performance.
Well, but Jim, you've always done that, right? I mean, you know, you've always been a fan favorite. Matt and I have been admirers of yours for years and years and years. But I think it's a little bit more than that, right? Because you're now not just giving your effort, which is what we've always admired about you. You've always given 100%. You've always fought your hardest. You've always done a great job. That's just part of who you are. But now you're giving us a little bit more, right? You're sharing with us more about who you are and what this journey was like and what we should be doing to avoid this. So how have the fans now responded to you differently now that you're sharing some vulnerability and you're sharing with us what it was like to go on this Lyme disease journey?
I feel like by opening up and sharing my experience and my Lyme journey and battle, that there is a level of appreciation and a level of respect that I've gotten for being vulnerable, you know, for opening up about it, because there is this aspect of fighting that there are a lot of fighters that kind of just put on the shell, right, and become the persona, where I try to be really open about it and be open about what I'm going through and what I'm doing and who I am, which is more than just a fighter. There's a lot more to me than just the guy that steps into the octagon. And I try to show that to people, and I feel that they do appreciate it.
We certainly do, and we thank you for that. So let me ask you one more piece of your life, and then we're going to let you go because you've been really, really generous with the time. Talk to us about Miller Brothers Mixed Martial Arts, and how you and your brother are developing this business, and what impact both your UFC career and your Lyme disease journey has had on the business you and your brother have developed.
Well, actually, about a year ago, I ended up selling the gym. But you know what? We opened it up in 2014. We opened it up because there was some drama in the previous team we were training with and stuff like that. And I wanted to avoid that. And of course, drama follows you everywhere. So we ended up having to deal with our own. But honestly, having a place that was my own, it saved my career through my battle. It really did. The only reason that I'm fighting today in 2022 is because I opened up my own place, because having a team and having a culture on the mat that I could trust everybody that I was training with when I was at my lowest, it totally is the reason that I'm still here. I would have definitely gotten injured on some of those days that were not my best had I been training at one of the bigger gyms, because coaching is so difficult, right? Because reading athletes and reading people is so difficult that if I was in the mix on one of those practices that I had been a part of for years prior, I probably would have sustained an injury that would have cost me my career. We tried to build a great group on the mat, but also, in our fight team, but also just in our general students as well. And it was awesome to be part of the community and try to have barbecue every year and bring everybody together and very, very family friendly and very close knit group. And it wasn't in my plans from the beginning to end up selling it, but COVID kind of put us in a position where I would have had to be there, every night teaching classes while trying to still compete as a fighter, or cut away the anchor. And I chose to cut away the anchor, and still the same great group of people. And it's just, I'm not the one in charge anymore. So
of course, another one of the difficult decisions that you always seem to be capable of making when faced with them, which of course served you professionally, it has served you in your Lyme journey, and it continues to serve you and your family well. So I think it really is a nice way of tying up this really powerful interview. And we can't thank you enough for spending time with us on this podcast and sharing your really powerful story with the folks who follow the Tick Bootcamp podcast. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Tick Bootcamp interview with UFC legend Jim Miller. To our listeners, we have a call to action. First, if you'd like to learn more about Jim Miller and his career as a professional athlete, please visit his Instagram page at jimmiller_155. Second, if you enjoyed this episode of the Tick Bootcamp podcast, please share with your friends by using the social media buttons you see at the bottom of our post. Third, Tick Bootcamp has created a Tick by Blueprint that has been inspired by the information that has been shared with us by past podcast guests. We urge you to visit our website at tickbootcamp.com to view the blueprint. Please note we would appreciate any input or any improvements you would like to share with us. Fourth, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify to get your automatic episode updates of our Tick Bootcamp podcast. And finally, we thank your community for your comments on our past podcast episodes. Please take a minute to leave us an honest review on iTunes, on Instagram, or on our website. We make it a point to read every single one of the reviews we get. Thank you, as always, for listening.